They mock him.
I just think you're dumb.
Hillary's book blamed him.
A prominent Trump supporter, Aubrey Shines, produced an online video attacking me.
John Oliver mocks him, calls him a nut job from Tampa. Trump thanked him. So he continues to shine the light.
We can do better, we will do better, but we'll only make it happen if you are informed. That's what we're here to do.
America shines when you're connected to Aubrey Shines. Here's your host, Aubrey Shines.
Hello and welcome to America Shines. I am your host, Aubrey Shines. Wisconsin Supreme Court candidates Susan Crawford and Brad Schimel are going head-to-head in Wisconsin for a spot in the state Supreme Court. Now, when voting is important to know, one should know who your candidates really are. Schimel has a tough on crime approach, while Crawford recently defended her decision, if you can imagine this, to significantly reduce sentence for a convicted child molester who had assaulted a 5-year-old girl multiple times. The election is set for April 1st, and the results could determine whether Wisconsin law is represented by a liberal who is soft on serious offenses or a conservative judge who upholds the power of law. Here with me now to discuss this is the National Director of Priests for Life, Father Frank Pavone. Frank, good to have you. Good to see you again, my friend. Let's delve into this because I want to talk to you, Frank, not just about the Wisconsin Supreme Court battle that's going on right now. It's important. But in our second segment, I also want to talk to our audience about something you're really involved in, and that is what the pro-life movement have designated April to be. Before we get there, let's go. Why is this Supreme Court vote, Frank, so significant, not, by the way, just to Wisconsin, but also to the rest of the United States of America? Frank.
Well, Aubrey, good to be with you again. And you, of course, you already mentioned one key issue that is happening in this race. But another one is that, and there have been some articles about this already, this Wisconsin State Supreme Court race has been getting national attention because, you know, these courts have a lot to do with how districts are ultimately reshaped and boundaries drawn for congressional districts, and of course that has an impact on electoral votes and on the outcome of the midterm elections. All of this to say, in a nutshell, that literally, it's no exaggeration, that the Wisconsin Supreme Court race could determine the direction that the House of Representatives goes in the 2026 midterms. And that's not immediately intuitive. You know, it's not clear directly what the connection is, but it's because of, again, the role of the court in redistricting. And the implications of that, of course, are that, God forbid, if the Democrats took back the U.S. House, the second half of President Trump's second administration is going to be like what we saw in the first term, with needless, ridiculous, time-wasting investigations and even impeachment efforts. We don't need to go down that road as a country. And that's why the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, April 1st, is of concern to the entire country. Obviously, we know people in other states cannot vote for it, but we know people in Wisconsin, and people can put up things on social media and websites and podcasts, and people in Wisconsin can hear it.
So, Frank, I don't want to lose the momentum here of the significance, because you brought out a few caveats. One, we're talking about the electoral race. We're talking about adding a couple more congressional districts, which would then give the balance of our United States Congress over to the Democrats. And without what they've already stated, because guys there in Houston, some of the congressional leaders like Al Green and these other guys, they've already come out and said, hey, give us the power. 2 more years from now, we will impeach Donald Trump. We will bring back the LGBTQ community as it relates to putting guys in girls' sports and that whole array. So, Frank, talk to the pastors specifically right now, and we have a lot of them. We're going to be taking Frank, by the way, segments of this. I know two of the largest pastors in the state of Wisconsin. What would you say to those pastors? Why do they need to really pay attention? Why should they encourage their congregants to get out and vote as it relates to the Supreme Court vote? Frank.
Well, to the pastors recognize, look, the people of God have more power here than is often the case in a lot of other states. So different states choose their Supreme Court justices differently. Right now, there's an effort underway in Kansas, for example, where the Supreme Court there does not represent the values of the majority of Kansans, and they are trying to change the way those justices are put on the court by bringing it to a direct vote of the people. Fortunately, those of you who are in Wisconsin, you've got the power in your hands, and therefore the moral opportunity, the moral responsibility, of course, to make a change. Now, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has been a conservative court for a long time. In 2023, 2 years ago, it flipped from a conservative majority to a 4-3 liberal majority. But now, with one of the liberal justices retiring, we have a chance, you have a chance to flip it back again. This also has implications, I'll say to the pastors, for abortion. And the reason is that right now, the Wisconsin Supreme Court is considering whether or not the Wisconsin Constitution contains a so-called right to abortion. Now, of course, it doesn't. It was never, nowhere in the history of the Wisconsin Constitution is there a reference to a right to abortion. But should this election go the wrong way, and if the court remains in let me say, left-wing hands, we are going to see the abortion laws that the people of Wisconsin, that the pastors of Wisconsin have for decades worked so hard to pass and implement and enforce, wiped off the books. If there's a right to abortion in the Constitution, well, then every law, every executive decision, every action of the government in Wisconsin has to conform to that. It's literally life and death. It's bloodshed or it's reverence and protection for life. That's what it boils down to here. We've got to get Brad Schimmel onto that court.
So, Frank, I usually don't take time to really amplify or harness in on a specific ethnicity, but I need to for this point and this point only. Blacks in America represent around 12.8 to 13.2% of the population, yet they are the number one aborted child in the United States of America when you break down the ethnic groups, ethnicity by ethnicity. So all of the guys and girls that are black and brown in the state of Wisconsin, aren't they doing themselves a disservice by putting someone liberal that will obviously continue to target black and brown communities instead of going, wait a minute, the one thing that black and brown people need the least, and that is more murders in their community? Wouldn't that be enough, or shouldn't that be enough, Frank, to get out and say, look, we're not going to allow this genocide to continue in our state of Wisconsin by electing a liberal justice? Frank, am I missing something there?
No, you're completely right. Let me reference a film called Maafa 21, MAAFA 21.com. This was produced a number of years ago to prove the point that you're making, that abortion disproportionately targets the black community. And I use the word targets because, you know, it's not because the black community wants to kill their children. It's because the abortion industry, which does not have a conscience, which hates humanity, and which is racist. Planned Parenthood was founded by a racist, Margaret Sanger. They target the black community, and they've done so, unfortunately, very successfully. Maafa 21 unfolds that in great detail, and Dr. Alveda King has been echoing that theme very strongly as well.
And for those of you in the Wisconsin area that don't remember perhaps who Dr. Alveda is, she's Denise. Alveda King is the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King. A dear friend of mine, by the way, who I 100% certainly echo her sentiment on this. I'm coming back with my friend, Father Frank Pavone. You don't want to miss this. I have some very important questions for him, not just for those in Wisconsin, but for all of us here in the United States of America. We'll be right back.
the flag horses rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
So we're going to be saturating Wisconsin with all of these social clips here. This is so important because Wisconsin, really, you will become the conduit. You're going to hold the key for the rest of the nation. If Wisconsin, if you guys don't get out and understand that it's almost sovereign in my mind that God have allowed you to have an opportunity not just to redeem yourself, but to kind of set the course for the entire nation. I want to say this before I bring my guest back in and before I show you a clip here. When we talk about Planned Parenthood, don't forget the origin. Planned Parenthood was called the Negro Project. That's the original term of Planned Parenthood. You heard my friend Frank speak on this earlier about Margaret Sanger. She was the founder of Planned Parenthood. By the way, marched with the KKK, spoke on behalf of the KKK, believed that black people were weeds, and Jewish people as well, that they were weeds and needed to be exterminated. That name then went over into a change for obvious reasons. It wasn't fitting well with the direction that America was going in. Changed its name to Planned Parenthood. Primarily, these offices are in poor white, black, and brown areas in our nation. This is why this election is so important. I want to show you a clip, and then we're going to bring my friend, Father Frank Pavone, back in to give comment to it. Let's go to the clip.
Brad, could you tell us why we should be voting for you in the upcoming Supreme Court election on April 1st?
We have to restore objectivity to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. We've got judges that are pre-deciding cases before they're even filed. They are implementing a political agenda that they're walking through. If we don't win this back April 1st, we will not recognize our state by the time we have our next chance in 2028. So we got to get out and vote. This one matters. It's for all the marbles. Thank you.
Everybody, thank you. Brad Schimmel, Calumet County thanks you. The state of Wisconsin thanks you. And we are fighting for Brad. Get out and vote. Get your absentee ballot. Make sure you get a hold of 10 friends. We need to elect this man. Thank you very much, Calumet County.
Thank you.
So, Frank, it is important. I wanted to go back, and I want you to kind of piggyback on this before we get, Frank, into the B portion of what we're looking at in April. I talked about Margaret Sanger. She was over what was called the Negro Project to exterminate black, brown people. That's not my opinion. Those are facts that any American can find. Frank, why would any smart white, brown, or black person still be tied to a party that believes in exterminating an entire class of people? Please speak to that, Frank.
Unfortunately, the left is better at lying and deceiving than we often are at exposing the truth. And that's the only explanation, because anybody that has a half of a conscience and does see the facts like you're articulating, or will not associate with any party, with any electoral candidate who would give any room at all to Planned Parenthood to be involved in shaping our culture or our society. This is an attack on the black community. Legal abortion has been, continues to be an attack rooted in a woman who said that we have to get rid of the less desirable portions of our population. And Aubrey, you spoke directly, we both spoke directly to the pastors a moment ago as well. And I would recall for them too what Margaret Sanger said about the pastors. She said, you know, we've got to hide. We have to make sure that blacks don't recognize what we're trying to do here, basically to eliminate them from our society. And therefore, one of our strategies will be that we get the pastors on our side, and they can reassure the people that everything's okay in terms of the agenda of Planned Parenthood. It's like, wow, we got to be smarter than that. And everyone should find that offensive. And then again, final point to it, it came up in that little video clip. We're talking here about this Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, April 1st, in the light of the bigger problem of judicial activism and judicial tyranny. We've had enough of this in America. We see now district court judges trying to act as if they can stop the entire executive branch from carrying out the will of 77 million voters across America. That's got to stop. The Supreme Court of the United States has to address that. But that's a symptom of a judicial activism, which is essentially an imbalance, an unconstitutional imbalance of power. And the courts have to be reined in. We need people like Brad Schimmel who know exactly what the proper role and proper authority of the court is under our Constitution.
So I want to take a moment and just say to the pastors once again, even to the various organizations, one I was actually a part of for a very, very long time, and I still hold it to be very, very dear in my heart. And I want to say to the pastors in Wisconsin under the regime or reformation of the Churches of God in Christ, to those that are part of the Assemblies of God, to those of you that are part of the Evangelical Baptist organization there, those that still remain, very small portion of you, that are Methodist and Lutheran and Episcopalian and Catholics alike. You must unite on this issue. Again, and I know this may be almost a bit ad nauseum, Planned Parenthood was originally called the Negro Project. There was a eugenicist. She hated black, brown people. She believed that you needed to be exterminated. You were not as desirable. Every time you, in that organization, you vote for the party that continues to support Planned Parenthood, you are helping fulfill your own genocide because you're killing yourself. The number one thing that murders a black, brown, and poor white child is Planned Parenthood. And you, the taxpayer in Wisconsin, you're facilitating that. Come on, it's time to wake up. Get out of that. Frank, I want to go to another topic here. I only have a few moments here with you, a few minutes here. And that is, April has been designated by those in the pro-life movement, and you've really been the champion, the stalwart in it. I want our audience to know this. Every time my friend Frank is here, I always say this. Frank was the gentleman that I believe God divinely used sovereignly to bring to faith the young lady that was really the name Jane Doe as it relates to what we now know as abortion. And even though it's been put back to the States, it was my friend, Father Frank Pavone, that led that young lady to faith. Why is it so important, Frank, for us to look at April designated as a time for pro-lifers to really be advocates for life? Why April? Why that month? I'm just curious. Was there some cross-pollination there, Frank, that was going on? Why did you guys choose April for this, Frank?
Well, April, of course, we're experiencing the beauty of springtime. Christians celebrate the Lenten season, the death of Christ, and then, of course, his resurrection, the date of Easter varying each year, of course. But this whole theme of new life and rebirth is so important when we talk about healing the wounds of abortion. So April is Abortion Recovery Awareness Month. Now, many people are not aware that there's a need to recover from something because abortion has been presented as this solution to a problem. It's going to fix everything. But those who actually go through having an abortion realize that just the opposite is true. It doesn't solve any problems. It only creates more. And it creates deep, devastating wounds. April is a time when we unite together as pro-life groups and we say, let's look at a very simple question. How does abortion impact women's health? And if people are concerned about women's health, as those who are pro-choice often say they are, why wouldn't you at least look at the question and try to get an honest answer? When you try to get an honest answer, you see there's a lot of devastation. But the good news is that there are many healing programs, and I'm privileged to oversee the world's largest one. It's called Rachel's Vineyard. And people are finding healing every day, not just through psychological counseling, but through the power of the Word of God, the grace of Christ who died and rose again. And healing is happening every day. So many people are out there suffering the wounds of abortion, and they don't know that there is healing, or they might not even realize that what they're suffering is a result of their abortion. That's why it's important to dedicate a month to raising that awareness, educating the public, and bringing people to the healing they so deeply need and so richly deserve.
Frank, please share with our audience, where can they find you? Why should they get involved? By the way, I'm a huge fan of Father Frank Pavone. This guy's my friend. We've supped together. We got some other plans that are soon to appear across our nation together. Frank, how can our audience find you? I think you're worth everyone to stop, pause, pay attention, and also to support. Frank, please share that info with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, in reference to what I was just saying, one of our many websites is lifeafterabortion.com. Lifeafterabortion.com for all the things I was saying about healing and so forth. But our overall website is prolifecentral.org. Prolifecentral.org. And find me on social media at FR Frank Pavone. FR Frank Pavone.
He is the director for Priests for Life, Father Frank Pavone. Coming right back, you don't want to miss what you're about to hear regarding our Department of Education. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Flagboys rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Shouting the battle cry of freedom.
So, there is something definitely wrong with the Department of Education. Over the years, we've seen American children fall behind other countries in terms of academics. This is a huge problem, and it needs to be solved because our children are the future of America. Here with me now to break all this down is Senior Research Fellow in Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation, Jonathan Butcher. Jonathan, I want to show you a clip. I've been advocating, by the way, for this for a very long time. And again, you're the expert. I want you to be able to speak to it. Let's go to the clip, guys, and we'll bring Jonathan right back in.
They're not doing a good job. And if you take a look at our education process, and if you look at the charts, because they have numerous charts where they do the top 40, we're at number 37, 38, 39, and 40. And recently they hit, during Biden's last few days, they hit last. So they were number 40, and yet we're number 1 in cost per pupil. So it's pretty bad. But we have a dream. And you know what the dream is? We're going to move the Department of Education. We're going to move education into the states so that the states, instead of bureaucrats working in Washington, so that the states can run education.
Jonathan, I think Trump has this right. I do, and that is, let's move it back to the states. Is he right or is he wrong, Jonathan?
I think he is absolutely right. I mean, students need the adults who are closest to them to meet their unique needs because every child is different. What the U.S. Department of Education has done is grown in budget size and create programs to cater to different special interests. And the reality is that we know a high quality teacher makes a huge difference in a student's life, but we don't know what makes for a high quality teacher. It certainly is not membership in a union. It's also not the number of degrees that a teacher may have. And so what we have to do is set parents up so that they can make choices about where and how their children learn. And the regulations coming from Washington actually get in the way of making those choices.
So, Jonathan, 2 quick questions, and even though I have probably 20, I'll try to squeeze them all here as quickly as I can. Let's talk about the genesis of the Department of Education under Jimmy Carter. I know there is this big dispute because there are a lot on the left now saying, oh, no, those were not accurate numbers at all. Where did we rank educationally prior to the Department of Education, federal government taking over, versus where are we ranking as American citizenry right now with our students? Jonathan.
Well, the achievement gap between students at the upper end and the lower end of the income scale has been about the same for the last 50 years. And so the reality is that federal programs that apply in the same way across schools and across states hasn't moved the needle on achievement. Likewise, with the amount of money that's come. The number's been quoted by Secretary McMahon of over $1 trillion since the creation of the Department of Education. I mean, you can look at it in terms of what we spend per pupil. It's at least tripled. And look, the share of administrators, so non-instructional staff, who have been hired over the last 60 years is up some 700%, whereas the share of students is only about 100%. increase in the number of teachers taught who have been hired is about 243%. So, we're hiring non-instructional staff. Again, it's to meet often the demands that are coming from Washington for filling out forms, for adhering to how Title I money and IDEA is supposed to be carried out. So the department itself, it was created with an agreement with teacher unions. President Carter made an agreement with them once it was created, and unions have tapped into the different lines of federal spending that have allowed them to constantly call for additional money.
So, okay, for our audience sake, because again, they're being just bombarded with news. This is going to be a horrible idea. You shouldn't take it away from the feds to send it over to the states. Juxtapose for our audience, what would it look like? No longer federally controlled funding going in, but individual states. After that, I do have another question, but explain to our audience, give a vivid picture here, the difference between feds over DOE versus the states over their own educational department. Jonathan.
Well, remember that the per student funding number that we just talked about, 90% of that already comes from states and local taxpayers. Washington only makes up about 10% of the actual funding. However, the rules and regulations that come from Washington far outweigh what they are putting in terms of money. What the recent reduction in force at the Department of Education, which just happened this week, they will continue to administer Title I spending, which is money for children from low-income areas. They're going to continue IDEA spending and programs, which is money and programs for children with special needs. They're even going to continue student loans. So all of these essential functions that parents and students depend on or have come to depend on, they're all going to still happen even with this RIF that passed just this last week. So as we move these important programs and keep them going, we can then cancel the programs that are ineffective, right? Things like Title II, which is money for teacher recruitment and training. Even those who like Title II say it has been ineffective. There are various specific programs for, say, Alaskan Native students and Hawaiian Native students. There is money already for those students in their states. But these are the kinds of things that we can close to help streamline the agency to focus on priorities while we eventually wind down the whole thing and move it to state control.
In this last block here with you, Jonathan, before we go to the next block, I spoke with a congressional leader in Georgia this past week. I said to him, hey, I'm having one of the top research guys come on. He said to me, and I know it was a lie, but I play golf with this guy, so I kind of bear with this guy. He said, look, here's the problem, Aubrey. Poor kids in our communities, they're not going to get the same funding as the richer kids in richer communities. So it's a horrible idea. Would you take a moment, 30 seconds, totally obliterate that concept for my friend, Jonathan?
Well, on average, per student, the Title I spending can be as low as $500 additional. $500 additional is not going to help close the achievement gap. You're going to need a student who has moved to a school that can meet that child's unique needs if they're struggling in their assigned school. And in order to create those kinds of programs, those come from state lawmakers. And so if we're going to open new charter schools in Georgia, if we're going to make it available for students to get private school scholarships, which they have in the state of Georgia, it's going to be up to the legislature to create more options and opportunities, right? This is a state function to create these kinds of opportunities.
Got a few other questions, Jonathan, for you. Let's go to a quick break. Come right back with Jonathan Butcher.
Shouting the battle cry of...
I know we've all been probably repulsed by one of the congressional leaders out of Texas. And I'm going to give you a little history of her in just a moment. But I find her repulsive for so many reasons. One, I have a lot of friends in the area where she actually represents a district. How you guys allowed this lunatic to represent your district is baffling. The beauty of the great Constitution is you do have a right to put in office whoever you want to. I love that about our constitutional republic. But this is an individual that is reflecting your values? Or does she? Did you guys, especially if you're black or women, did you just put her in because she was black? Or because she was a woman? Boy, you would have missed a bigger picture. Remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. Let's not judge people, use people based on the color of their skin, but how about the content of her character? And in this case, I don't see any character. Don't take my word. I always say this. Here is Jasmine Crockett. She is a rep out of Texas. These are not my words. This video has not been edited. Let's go to the clip.
First of all, thank you for making the back of my head famous. But second of all, if we could do a sequel, if you could tell Donald Trump anything tonight, what would you tell him?
I would tell him to grow a spine and stop being Putin's.
We had to bleep it out, but she used a very derogatory term, and I'm going to tell you why she did it in just a moment here. To grow a spine, you're talking about a president who has, on 2 separate occasions, had his life almost taken away from him. You're talking about a man that after he was shot in his head, God's grace being upon him only hit his ear. Had he turned just a millisecond away, his head would have exploded on TV. The same guy that when he was bleeding, he jumped back up and began to, while blood is streaming down, began to say to the American citizenry, fight, fight, fight. You're talking about a man who, had you had your way, spent 700 to 900 years in prison, separated from his wife, his children, his grandchildren, his friends, family. Who is Jasmine? Who is she? Before I tell you exactly who she is, don't just take that one clip. Let's look at one more clip of this moronic-minded individual that is really being an actor. She's pretending. I'm going to prove it to you in just a moment. Let's go to the next clip.
This is not what we should be doing. I don't even know why we fighting with Greenland. Why we fighting with Greenland? We fighting with Canada. We fighting with Mexico. Yet we in love with Putin. What is happening? Like, this is not America. This is a terrible nightmare. Somebody slap me and wake me the up, because I'm ready to get on with it.
I'm almost stunned. Let me help this very myopic-minded individual. When she says that, in essence, we're being friends with Russia, for those of you that don't know, Russia was actually an ally to the United States of America when we were fighting against Hitler. I don't know why she doesn't know this. Not only was Russia a friend and an ally, had it not been for Russia, according to a lot of the historians, we may not have had the success to the degree, because Russia gave up millions, that's what an M, millions upon millions of their soldiers, their people. You say, wait a minute, Aubrey, are you pro-Russia? Well, you've been conditioned to hate Russia. And I'm not saying that they're the best guys on the block, but the United States of America has always been friends to those that we need in a time of need. And relationships change often. Again, don't forget your history. Russia was once an ally against Stalin, who killed hundreds of millions of people. Again, Russia was our ally. So again, for those of you that would write and say, oh, I can't believe it, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, Aubrey, you're bringing in, you're bought into the Russian propaganda. No, I've not brought into anything. I just happen to know history. But let me tell you something about Jasmine that you don't know. And you need to understand this if you're going to understand why, and I want you to get this, people. Why is it that the media keeps pushing her out there? It's a subliminal message, and here's what's really going on. She comes off, and this is going to hurt a little bit, she comes off as this, quote, hood girl. like she's down. She talks the language of the streets. She relates to, quote, black and brown and people in the urban area of America. Flash News Bulletin. Study her history. She went to the best of schools. I'm not even talking college yet. I'm talking about such expensive private schools, most of you wouldn't see that annual income in 2 years. From her high school over to her college, she went to a top private university. Yeah, Jasmine did that. I've heard her off record. What you're seeing of this woman is no more than the image she wants you to see. She wants to be the next, quote, black down girl who's correcting all the white people. It seems like she has a visceral hatred towards whites. I'm going to say something. I hope you can read between the lines. A person gets a chance to speak how they want and wear what they want and dress what they want. As an adult, I really don't care. But if you hate a group of people, why do you socially and culturally appropriate yourself after them? If you hate white people so much, Jasmine, why are you wearing hair extensions that come from people other than black? Again, wear what you want. But if you're going to really, really hold up your end of the bargain, shouldn't you be so down that you lose the hair and you lose the fake eyes and you lose all of that? Why would you find yourself in some of the most prestigious colleges, high schools? You don't even speak that way. You know how to grammatically structure English in such a way that it doesn't come off as if though you're some inner city, white or black. I'm not making that a black issue, but you come off as if though you're part of the hood, that you can't conjugate verbs properly, and the only language you use has to be blotted out on TV because you're using expletives to describe your feelings. So anyone that doesn't think like you, act like you, believe like you, what is it? They're really not down? They're really not for the people? When you talk about Donald Trump, it's not just Donald Trump. Jasmine, he represents almost 80 million Americans, black and white, by the way, and brown, that put him in office. They put him in office because of what you said, he doesn't have a spine. The first president to make the, quote, numbers in the hood as it relates to economics better than any other president, including Barack Hussein Obama. That's a fact. These are not my opinions. The first president to, at least in the last 20, 30, 40 years, that have taken us away from wars, ended wars, standing up to China, standing up to Putin, standing up to Zelensky, saying we're not going to allow entitlement of the American citizenry to keep paying for lifestyles other than Americans. Jasmine, we're talking to you today. I'm coming right back after a quick break.
The battle cry of freedom.
So one of the reasons that I wanted to have our guest on today, it was simple. It wasn't just because these guys were just arbitrarily chosen. Real significant. Again, when we were talking to my friend Father Frank Pavone in the earlier blocks, we were talking about the impact of life. We were talking about Planned Parenthood. You often heard me reference things about the Negro Project, or now what we know as Planned Parenthood. These are significant issues. Why? The left has always been very masterful at changing language. In other words, they'll make something horrible sound fantastic. It's almost like something that we studied in school once when one of our professors said, you don't just kill a mice or rat by giving it poison. Eventually they will avoid it. You have to put some food, some sustenance in there, and they are more drawn to the food, not realizing, wow, that is tainted, and then their lives are shut down. It's the same principle that we see with Planned Parenthood. Again, I normally never take the time to emphasize black or white or brown. As a Christian, I just see us really as one race. Different ethnicities, of course, but just one race of people. There isn't a group of blood for group A and group B, a different DNA. It doesn't exist. Basic science would teach you that. But the left have been masterful at using words like pro-life. Well, that sounds good. Or choice. That even sounds better because it implies you don't have a choice in this. But we don't have a choice to take another life without penalty. Understand, if you don't even believe in a Judeo-Christian ethos, if you even understood the basic of your Constitution, everyone has a right to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness. And when we take upon ourselves to be the master of someone else's life, that's a bit scary. We've seen that throughout history. Really doesn't work very well at all. We're looking at it in China. They're now having to revise their positions on mandating that women cannot have but X amount of children. Well, that's not worked out that well for them because now they're trying to find ways to populate China. They're depleting. That's a given. That was a God idea that they aborted, forgive me for the pun there, but they aborted it in China, and as a result, they're now in a crisis. The same thing we saw in what we now know as Germany. They tried to exterminate a group of people based on, again, an ideology. It did not work out well because millions and millions of people, not just through the horrific savagery of Hitler, it was beyond that. Other lives were lost because we intervened and we said, hey, enough of that. This type of killing is unnecessary. But also we saw something else in our earlier blocks, and that is the Department of Education. You got to ask yourself, why is it that you have the federal government, those that are, again, this is not a Democrat or Republican issue, but it should be for this reason. Why is it that free-minded people like myself, we want monies to go to the states and not to the federal government? Maybe you've been absent for a period of time. Let me remind you of some of the history. When our federal government has been over the Department of Education under Jimmy Carter, when it started, it plummeted. Our educational status dropped precipitously, almost to the bottom. We spend more dollars per child, but the majority of our poor white, black, brown kids in urban areas, they can't read. Don't take my word for it. Go out and do your own studies. Look at Maryland. Look at places like in Detroit. They cannot conjugate a verb properly. They cannot put things together. It's not because these are bad kids. Yes, I get it. There is some external problems here. You don't have enough dads in the home, but what you really have as well, you don't have parents that are involved, and you have a federal bureaucracy that is teaching the local states what they need to teach. Places like Japan and other places like Japan, they're teaching their kids math and science at a very early age. Our kids are not able to read at that age. And I'm not talking first, second, third grade here, people. I'm talking 7th, 8th grade. I'm talking their freshman, sophomore year of college. They cannot pass basic exams. Why? Because our federal bureaucracy that's been over the Department of Education, they're more interested in teaching our children, and I'm not making this up, by the way, how to put condoms on certain vegetables to teach our children about anal penetration. I know that's crass, but this is what's been happening. So you have unions that are lockstep in barrel with organizations like the LGBTQ and others. They rather teach our kids sexuality, but that's none of your business. You should be teaching our kids sex. Let's teach them math. Let's teach them the basic skill of reading. Let's teach them to reach higher. Let's teach them that no one's holding them down. other than a bureaucracy that's not for them. Let's teach them about family, about life, about the necessity of fathers being in a home. Those are the important things. They don't want to do it. We're shining the light every week. Until next week, I bid you peace.